Hey, Uncle Doug.
Hello.
If you were native to this land,
Yeah.
and you are,
I am, technically.
but if your people were,
Right.
tell me everything that you know about what your religion would be. Anything?
It would be different.
Because I know, there you go. I know nothing.
Yeah.
But Uncle Mark is here to give us some fine native wisdom.
That's
I
right.
guess. Uncle Mark, is that right? Do
Yeah.
you have anything to help us out with that?
I do. I think I can help you boys out with that very strangely specific question. Today I want to introduce us to somebody who's both kind of prophet and choreographer. So it's a strange job description, but I think we'll be seeing more of that in the future. So, guys, part of what we find fascinating about examining religion and the spectrum of irrational beliefs is how they're never really original, right? They're always some weird pastiche of older ideas dressed up in a new suit. And even then, they can't help but cross-pollinate with contemporary ideas in their vicinity.
Yeah,
So
it does seem like that may be the case. It's true.
today's story is true to form in that way, with a twist I did not expect at all when I dove into this. So
Ooh, fun.
Shyamalan.
Today I want to. Yeah, it's very, very Shyamalan. It's very Manite. So today I want to talk about a character that has long fascinated me, and a guy who is in the prophecy business not far from where we live, fellas.
Ooh.
So today I'm going to introduce us to Koitse O, also known as Jack Wilson, but best known as the Northern Paiute prophet Wovoka.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That's a lot of different monikers that guy has.
Yeah, he had a lot. He had a stage name and a
Yeah, exactly.
and he had a white man's name. So the man that would become known as Wovoka, who would later in life try to start a peaceful revolution, was born in the Smith Valley of Nevada, just south of Carson City, beautiful country.
Yeah.
In 1856. Now he was the son of a man called Tavibo, who assisted a highly regarded Northern Paiute prophet called Wadziwab, which is an awesome name.
That is,
And
I'm changing my name to that now. I'm now Uncle Wadziwab.
Wadziwab. At Wadziwab. So it's believed around 1870 that Wadziwab created a version of a common circle dance that would later be described as the ghost dance. This will be a detail of critical importance in just a tick.
Okay.
So, young Wovoka was training to become what the Northern Paiutes called a weather healer. So, in a harsh desert environment for a people who traditionally had a subsistence lifestyle based on fishing, hunting, and gathering pine nuts and roots, wanting to control the weather made sense, right? A late winter or an early frost might mean the difference between literal life and death.
sure.
So, now it seems that he never said these things about himself, but the local legends around Wovoka were that he could make a block of ice fall from the sky on a summer day,
Ooh.
which is an
That sounds
awesome weapon.
dangerous.
It's super dangerous. They said he could light his pipe from the sun and that he could make icicles hang from his fingers. So at his height, this man was very highly regarded among not only his people, but a lot of other people, as we'll show. So,
Yeah.
and while he was learning to follow both Wadziwab and his father into the weather healing business, he also began to work as a young ranch hand for some local white folks, David and Abigail Wilson, who were devoutly Christian Protestant, and they gave him the name Jack Wilson to use when dealing with white people, and at the same time passed on Bible stories that kind of fascinated the young spiritual student.
Have you given us a time frame for this? I don't know what time period we're in.
Yeah, so he was born in 1856.
Oh, okay.
So he was born just before the Civil War.
Okay.
And so in addition to the Bible stories that he was getting of God smiting the shit out of whole races, young Wovoka had long known that Wadziwab had prophesied a great earthquake that would swallow up all the white people but leave their shit behind. So, which is ideal, right? So it's kind of like a spiritual neutron bomb.
Yeah,
kill all the
right.
people but leave the grocery stores intact.
It's the rapture is what you're talking about.
Yeah, basically, just leave all their stuff because we can use that.
Yeah.
So, just a note that over the following years, Wadziwab kept revising his prophecy as the appointed dates for the earthquake kept coming and going. So, classic.
Weird.
prophetic
I've
edits,
never
right?
heard anything like that
Kind
before.
of a theme of this podcast.
Right. It's no different from so-called prophets everywhere. So, Pro tip for would-be prophets: do not be specific about dates, times, and places.
Oh man, vagary is so like your savior. You got to keep it
Vagary
vague.
is your friend. Yeah, exactly. So, into a world suffused with magic, prophecy, and the stresses of white Western expansion stepped Wovoka. Now, as I mentioned above, the Northern Paiute were semi-nomadic and very dependent on the thin layer of sustenance the high Nevada desert provided. So the encroachment of white cattlemen and other settlers began to limit their range, and then typhoid and other diseases brought by us are thought to have wiped out 10% or more of the Northern Paiute population, and then couple that with aggressive Christian proselytization by many groups.
Yeah.
And their traditional lifestyle was really under threat, as were their very lives. So, if ever his people needed the help of a prophet to help them survive all these shocks, now was definitely the time. So, the inciting incident here, in the throes of a terrible fever or some kind of trance, and it's hard to say because there's a lot of hearsay and varying versions about parts of this story.
Right.
Wovoka had a vision. He was in the presence of God and many of his ancestors, whom he observed living in abundance and in good health. So after speaking with God, he returned to consciousness and reported to his people.
The trick
He
is
said-
to die then.
Yes, I'm staying. Bye.
All you have to do is just die, and then apparently you get all the stuff you
And
want.
the lucky thing is there was a lot of that going around at the time.
Yeah.
Yes, dying was definitely
Oh, current.
The
a
system
buyer's
works.
market. The system works as designed. So he said it had been revealed to him that the Northern Paiute must observe their traditional ways, but totally shun war and violence. They must love each other and live in peace, neither lying nor stealing. If they did this and executed a new version of the round dance, according to a very specific set of instructions, they would live in health and abundance, and the white man would voluntarily and peacefully leave and go back to Europe.
His God was lying to him.
So
His God does not
wouldn't?
know white folk.
They never know when to leave. So his message was received with, as you can imagine, great happiness among his people, who began practicing the 5-day trance-inducing ritual immediately in hopes of curing all of what ailed them, all that boiling down to 2 words: white people.
Yeah.
So word soon spread among other native groups who eagerly sent emissaries to hear the new prophet's word. Many took what became called the ghost dance back with them in hopes it would deliver all that was promised, especially without more bloodshed and misery. So the dance was soon being practiced peacefully all over the West and the Northwest. But as we often discuss here, fellas, once you toss a powerful, magical idea out into the ocean, you have no idea where it will wash up and what somebody else is going to do with it.
Yeah.
So now, one of the groups of emissaries that crossed Utah to visit Wovoka were a group of Lakota Sioux from the plains. And many listeners will know they had a long-running war with the U.S. government and had forced Washington to the negotiating table and gotten about as good a treaty as could be expected at the time. They actually beat the United States, basically, right? And sued to kind of keep essentially the Dakotas as their own.
Yeah, I mean, they won a battle. We won the war, though.
Right. Yeah. We had certain advantages, I guess. But, well, it will come as no surprise that Washington had, of course, broken that treaty, forcing the wide-ranging Lakota into smaller and smaller parcels, demanding that they learn to farm, which they had no idea how to do, forcing their children into the horrendous and Christianizing boarding school programs, et cetera, et cetera. Couple that with, in recent years, the buffalo population of the Midwest had been driven to the edge of extinction. Rations to the new and struggling farmers had been cut by hateful bigots in the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And years of drought had the Lakota and the surrounding people totally on the brink. So they were in the market for solutions, right?
Yeah.
So anyone who knows a little about the history of the Sioux people knows that they were never going to go down without a fight. So they eagerly wanted the magic Wovoka promised that the ghost dance would deliver, but were willing to back up the retreat of the white people by force if necessary.
Right.
So the Lakota took it home with them and began performing the ritual. This spooked the U.S. government officials in charge of the area, who knew the Lakota were already seething from all the bullshit they'd been forced to put up with and the endless broken promises they fought so hard to secure. So the dance was seen as a prelude to war, and in this one instance, they were not wrong. So Two of the Lakota leaders that had traveled to Nevada were Kicking Bear and Short Bull. And they believed the ghost dance, along with the ghost shirt, a special rawhide shirt, would make them invincible in battle. A little more on that later.
Wow,
sadly,
it's funny when a peace dance just suddenly they just decide it's not that anymore. This is an invincibility dance, and fuck you.
Yeah. That's exactly what happened with the electric slide in the 80s.
It just, who knew it was going to go so wrong? My God, if we could have that day back. So sadly, they wouldn't have long to find out that they were mistaken. So on December 29th, 1890, fighting broke out between the U.S. cavalry and a small band of Lakota Sioux under Chief Spotted Elk when a deaf Lakota warrior didn't understand an order to surrender his gun. And when it was over, 153, mostly women and children, were dead, and a huge number missing and wounded in the panic.
Jesus.
And that's Wounded Knee, right? So that's all terrible, and one of the most infamous days in the terrible history of the U.S. and the native people that were here first.
You know what's
But
sad
leaving
is
that for a minute.
What's sad is that I didn't even recognize that you were describing Wounded Knee because there are so many instances like that.
Right.
That I was just like, oh, it's just another one. So, at least that one got famous.
So that was Wounded Knee, right? Which is horrendous. So leaving Wounded Knee aside for a second, I want to get back to Wovoka, where he was and what influences contributed to this terrible event at Wounded Knee. To be clear, none of this is Wovoka's fault directly, right? He wanted a peaceful revolution.
He just wanted to create. He just wanted to dance.
Mm-hmm. He just wanted to dance like Billy Elliot.
Yeah,
he just can't repress it. So the way into that discussion is the ghost shirt worn by so many of the Lakota killed that day. Wovoka was a northern Paiute in north-central Nevada, or, as our Mormon friends would call him in the most reductive, insultingly ahistorical way possible, a Lamanite. And as most listeners know, Mormons believe all native people of the Americas are descended from a small band of Jews that came to these empty continents a few thousand years ago and eventually forgot how to be good Jews, turned brown as a result of their wickedness, and forgot how to speak Hebrew. So Wovoka was well within the proximity of the Western Mormon Empire Brigham Young was attempting to install in a giant chunk of the Central West. The native people, or Lamanites, I will always put quotes around that, were of special interest to the Mormons, and missionaries were sent to every tribe, right?
Yeah.
In fact, the rumors of a Lamanite prophet was of extreme interest to many Mormons, many of whom found themselves sitting in a circle and listening to Wovoka himself describe his prophecies. So, I think in the Book of Mormon, there's some call forward to a possible Lamanite prophet in the future or something. I don't know, but it seems like he tickled that nerve, right?
Yeah. So, you can see why people who believe that, like, the Lord's people eventually evolved into these groups would then also be like, hey, wait, is it possible that the Lord is actually talking to them? Maybe.
Right.
Who knows?
Maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, if you take Mormons at their word, they believe these people were a direct connection to the Holy Land, right?
Yeah.
Like these people are Jews, are just fallen lapsed Jews. So anyway, and also remember that in the Plains tribes, like the Lakota, crossed through the Mormon regions that would become Utah, Colorado, Idaho, etc., to hear Wovoka's message. Now, while there is some disagreement, most hotly disputed by Mormon apologist scholars, it was originally posited by anthropologist James Mooney, a man who met and interviewed Wovoka himself, that the origin of the ghost shirt lies very close to home for us fellas.
Uh-oh.
The Mormon sacred garments.
I love it.
My God.
So-called magic
love it.
underwear, which we fully discussed in episode 28. And I just listened to that the other day. It was very funny, but this isn't so funny. So if you consider the stresses these people were under, literally facing the extinction of their civilizations, and that they would travel to a distant Messiah in hopes of gaining his magic to save themselves, what sort of magic would they turn down if the survival of their people was at stake, right? And on top of all that, remember there was a lot of Mormon presence in the Plain States as well, where the Sioux were from, so Winter Quarters and Council Bluffs being Mormon outposts in the Midwest. With everyone in the story, involved in the story long dead, we'll never know for sure, but there is seriously strong circumstantial evidence for this being the case. So I didn't know this when dug into this story that there was this connection, and so it kind of blew my socks off. But it's an eerie echo of a terrible past into our Mormon present. This whole story is a study in how irrational ideas transmit and mutate, like how a dream of a peaceful change ends up with 153 murdered people in the snow, and how maybe the bullet-riddled shirts with magic markings on them were the result of just another weird lie out of the head of a dirt farmer from New York who wanted to be president and marry all the 14-year-old girls he could, who in his final moments was surely startled to find out his own magic shirt was also very much not bulletproof. Really makes you think. So that's pretty much the story. Wovoka died an old man in Nevada in 1932.
Wow.
His revolution never happened. The shirts didn't work. The dance didn't work. White people are all still here. So it's a fun story.
So believe your prophets. I think that's the
Follow the prophet.
right. If there's a moral to the story, it's definitely that. And also, rawhide is not a material for clothing.
Yeah, but they looked way cooler than garments, so they had that going.
There is that. There is that.
Wow.
So that's it, fellas. Happy Wovoka Day.
Indeed. All right. Well, I guess we'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
Moving on.
Moving on.